I hope that y'all are doing well tonight. I am getting a little late start, but I was editing some pictures for my sister. So it always takes longer than you think in GIMP. It does. So anyway, I finished the last one and sent it off. So yeah, I am looking at Academy Impossible. Hi. Another TT viewer and Wrecking God. Okay. Hello, welcome to all of you. And I am getting ready to start. So, welcome, welcome. And I will get my act together and get a topic. So, let me do a fresh spanking news file for 3 September 2021. And I know I do my dates funny, but it's the European way, and I learned it doing genealogy research, so you can blame genealogy for my weird way of putting dates. So, we're going to talk about disability. And we've been talking about a lot of stuff this week. I still want to talk about education in general. So, let's see. Why don't we just make it education? And let's look at special ed and things like that. So, I'll go back over here and see if anybody has joined me. So I don't see any comments in the chat, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll go diving into the internet. So, disability and education. Let's look into the history of disability education. Well, let's look up all right, let's look at the National Park Service, and they have a series on disability history. So I will grab that and put it over here, and I will get the title. And off we go. And I'll put that in the chat so y'all can follow along. And off we go. Helen Keller said, "The highest result of education is tolerance." She was the first deafblind person to receive a Bachelor of Arts. Education for people with disabilities developed in an era shaped by the Civil War, abolition, and scientific discoveries. These events impacted education and the reformers who pushed for it. The reform of education for people with disabilities in the 1800s in the United States was in a reaction to the absence of educational opportunities for these populations. Various historic places are associated with educational reform and how American society taught and teaches individuals with disabilities. Gallaudet University, originally named the National Deaf-Mute College, opened in 1864 in Washington, D.C. Famed architects Olmsted Vow and Company designed Gallaudet. This was and continues to be the only American university specifically for deaf people, though the National Technical Institute for the Deaf is a college that serves deaf individuals as well. Gallaudet has contributed to the rights of the deaf community into the 21st century. And there's an article on the disability rights movement. So Samuel Gridley Howe and Alexander Graham Bell were among two promoters of educational reform for individuals with disabilities in the 1800s. They also helped research causes and possible cures for certain conditions. In 1832, Howe opened the Perkins School for the Blind in Massachusetts. As the first school for the blind in the U.S., the Perkins Institution, as it was then called, applied techniques inspired by European models. Howe developed an embossed letter system for blind people to read. This reading format was used until Braille came into common use by the late 1800s. Howe also worked with deaf students, though he opposed sign language as a method of communication. Instead, he preferred to teach lip reading and oral communication, a method known as oralism. Both Howe and Alexander Graham Bell preferred this method of communication, which would prove controversial in later years. Howe worked with famed students including Laura Bridgman and Helen Keller. Keller met Howe through Alexander Graham Bell. Bell, the inventor of the first telephone in 1876, supported Keller's learning. Bell also worked as a speech trainer. In 1887, he founded the Volta Laboratory. The laboratory served as an information center for deaf and hard of hearing persons. He advocated for the increase and diffusion of knowledge relating to the deaf. He also worked with an organization which is today known as the Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf. Like some physicians and politicians at the time, Bell supported eugenics as a mean of eliminating disabilities. Eugenics was the misguided belief that controlling genetics could improve the human race. Though there were many who opposed eugenics, there were unfortunately several advocates for it beginning in the 1800s. Arguments for and against eugenics persisted well into the 1900s. Support of eugenics influenced many spheres, including education. The Montana State Training School Historic District shares some of this challenging history associated with eugenics. Built in the 1910s, the state-funded school provided education, treatment, and residential housing for children with intellectual disabilities. The physician of the Montana State Training School also practiced forced sterilization, or the removal of one's ability to have children, on certain patients. This was unfortunately a common practice in the early 1900s. In the mid to late part of the 1800s, activists and politicians pushed to close these schools and programs. They advocated for new kinds of care, treatment, and education. So that's the Montana State Training School. Education opportunities for people with disabilities have transformed in the 20th and 21st centuries, largely because of federal legislation. The 1975 Education of All Handicapped Children Act and its amendments guaranteed free public education for all students with disabilities. The four purposes of that bill were to assure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education which emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their needs. 2. Assure that the rights of children with disabilities and their parents are protected. 3. Assist states and localities to provide for the education of all children with disabilities. And 4. Assess and assure the effectiveness of efforts to educate all children with disabilities. In 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, replaced PL 94142. Amendments to IDEA have continued to assist students with disabilities in a variety of classrooms. As the Department of Education has described, whereas Public Law 94-142 issued a national challenge to ensure access to education for all children with disabilities, the 1997 amendments to IDEA articulated a new challenge to improve results for these children and their families. IDEA has been a primary catalyst for the progress we have witnessed. So, let's look at the next one in this series. Actually, this is the, this page is about telling everybody's stories, not just certain's. So let's get this over here. I think it's good that they are trying to diversify history as far as the National Park Service. Definitely, it's a good thing to do. So, wish I could copy the title. Let's see. Okay. Very good stuff on here. All right, so I will just spell it out. And put the link over here. Yes, I am.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure because I realized it was 8:30 and I was like, "Ooh, live stream." Uh-oh.
I was a little late, but it's all right. I got through editing all the pictures.
Lila!
Yeah, Lila is there.
Hey, Lila.
She is laying behind my computer.
Yeah, I know. I smell like Andre. Andre was on the porch and I was petting him and he was rubbing against me. And now Lila's like strange kitty. I don't like it.
You should wash your hands before you touch her. You don't want to.
I did wash my hands.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know why it's on there, but
they can smell it. They can indeed. All right. So, let's see. This, whoops. Let's go. Well, if I can get there. Alrighty. Disability history. Featured places. Okay. And I'll put this link in there too, because we are discovering disability history. So I picked the places, and let me get this. Yeah. Get the title on there, and I will get the link. All right. And here we go. All righty. So, since the 1930s, children with disabilities have attended Camp Greentop in Catoctin Mountain Park in Maryland. In 1936, they invited the Maryland League of Crippled Children to use their camp space. At the time, only 24 camps for children with disabilities existed in the United States. Camp Greentop remains active today. Kalaupapa National Historical Park in Hawaii contains what was once a forced isolation center for people with leprosy, now more properly known as Hansen's disease. This is a contagious condition that affects the skin and nervous system. Until the 1940s, there was no effective medical treatment. From the 1860s through the 1960s, over 8,000 people with Hansen's disease were sent to the isolation center. In 1980, the National Park Service established Kalaupapa National Historical Park, encompassing both the isolation center and its surrounding landscape. The park works with local descendants and community to help interpret and represent the troubled history. Then there's Harriet Tubman National Historical Park in Auburn, New York, and Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park in Church Creek, Maryland. They share Tubman's dedication to public service over her lifetime. She helped dozens of families escape slavery and move to the North. A childhood trauma influenced Tubman's decision to rescue others. Born into slavery, Tubman was attacked by a slave owner, receiving significant wounds to her head. The injury resulted in lifelong seizures and narcoleptic episodes. She described these as visions in which she communicated with God. Tubman claimed these spells inspired her life's work to abolish slavery. Cool. The Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial on the National Mall in D.C. commemorates this president who played a significant role in the history of the United States and of the National Park Service. In 1934, he said, "There is nothing so American as our national parks. The fundamental idea behind the parks is that the country belongs to the people, that is in process of making for the enrichment of the lives of all of us." Included in the memorial, I don't know why I'm having trouble tonight, is a statue of FDR in his wheelchair. He required a wheelchair after a childhood illness, which was polio. And there's the Volta Laboratory and Bureau building. It was constructed in 1893 under the direction of Alexander Graham Bell to serve as a center of information for deaf and hard of hearing persons. Bell, best known for receiving the first telephone patent in 1876, was also an outstanding figure of his generation in the education of the deaf. Dr. Bob's home in Akron, Ohio, is nationally significant for its central role in the establishment of Alcoholics Anonymous, a global organization whose mission is to assist alcoholics in achieving and maintaining sobriety. Along with William Griffith Wilson, Robert Smith is considered a co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. The establishment of AA marked a turning point in the history of alcoholism and its treatment. 3 of the structures located at Ivy Green in Tuscumbia, Alabama, the cottage, the main house, and the water pump, served as the birthplace, early childhood home, and site of communication breakthrough for Helen Adams Keller. The homestead was the site of pivotal experiences which led up to Keller's emergence in the forefront of the effort to provide better methods and facilities to educate people with disabilities. Established in 1867, the northwestern branch of the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers, now the Clement J. Zablocki VA Medical Center, was the second of the original 3 branches established by the newly formed Board of Managers. Located on the west side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the 400-acre campus sits just south of the Milwaukee Brewers Miller Park baseball stadium and the Silurian Fossil Reef, a geological site designated as the Soldiers' Home Reef. Okay, so the Westin Hospital is one of a small number of 19th century institutions that survive in America to illustrate the great reforms in the treatment of mental patients. The importance of this movement attracted some of the greatest architects of the 19th century in America. Nebraska School for the Deaf in Omaha, Nebraska, was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2019. The school grew from its founding in 1869 to a 23-acre campus with 11 buildings. The history of the school follows the controversy of teaching methods for deaf students. Blackwell's Island, Roosevelt Island in New York City, has a deep connection to disability and incarceration. For much of the early 1900s, New Yorkers nicknamed the island Welfare Island after the asylums, prisons, and almhouses that were built there. While most of the buildings have long since fallen into disrepair, the ruins are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Then the Federal Building at 50 UN Plaza, San Francisco. It's an excellent example of Second Renaissance revival architecture, including its distinct horizontal divisions and classical ornamentation like exterior columns. Except for a portion of the McAllister Street elevation, which is faced in terracotta, the building is constructed of brick and faced in granite. The Federal Building has also been the site of important civil rights protests. And we go on. There's a lot of places and many, many pages of it. So, yeah, lots of places. Let's go to Ivy Green and see where Helen Keller grew up. Oh, I have to sign in. Um, well, I don't want to. Let's see. Let's go back to the internet and let me see if anybody's commenting, and they're not. But there are a lot of places, and I don't have all night, so let me go back. Alrighty. Okay, let's look at the evolution of special education. This is from Principal magazine. Okay, so I'll put this link here, and all right, we'll put this here. And I'll put this link here too, and look over this. Okay. In 1893, the Massachusetts Supreme Court upheld the expulsion of a student solely due to poor academic ability. Nearly 30 years later, it denied education to a student with cerebral palsy because he produced a depressing and nauseating effect upon the teachers and school children. This is just one example of the widely accepted belief around the turn of the century that students with disabilities were best kept at the margins of society. So, the first significant court case to influence special ed actually addressed racial segregation. In Brown versus Board of Education, it was determined that segregation on the basis of race violated equal educational opportunity. The Brown decision led the way to a growing understanding that all people, regardless of race, gender, or disability, have a right to a public education. It's good that we've gotten here. Let me, although funding for special education programs and training increased following that decision, school districts still had the right to choose whether or not to participate in special education incentive programs throughout the mid 1960s. Sorry about that. In 1965, with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, schools began to receive federal money for public education. A year later, an amendment to it set aside funds specifically for students with disabilities. In 1973, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act stated that a person with a disability cannot be excluded or denied benefit from any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, either public or private. The ADA requires the additional compliance of school districts and institutions that do not receive federal aid. As late as 1975, up to half the estimated 8 million children with disabilities in the U.S. were either being inappropriately educated or fully excluded from the public school setting. So, the next major phase in the evolution of special education came on in 1975 when President Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, currently known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. What was previously seen as a privilege is now a legal right, and the basic requirements of the original law remain the hallmarks of special education as we know it today. All children with disabilities must have an individualized education program, an IEP, a free and appropriate public education, and be served in the least restrictive environment. However, while it focused on access to educational programs for students with disabilities, it did not address the degree of educational opportunity. Courts were left to decide what truly constitutes a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. The next major milestone came in 1982 um, with Hudson Central School District versus Rowley. That was the first special ed case in the Supreme Court. The court ruled that students who qualify for special education services must have access to public school programs that meet their unique educational needs, and that the programs must be supported by services that enable students to benefit from instructions. The High Court further ruled that while parents were not necessarily given the right to the best possible programs for their children, students with disabilities are entitled to an IEP reasonably calculated to facilitate learning. The ruling gave lower courts a standard to follow when deciding what adds up to free and appropriate public education. And according to the U.S. Department of Education, by 1990, students who qualified for special ed services had increased 23% since 1976. Amendments to IDEA provided supplemental funding for state and local programming, mandated services for 3 to 5-year-olds, and added traumatic brain injury and autism to the existing disability categories. However, they did little to address issues of low expectations for students with disabilities, the lack of focus on research-based programming, and the arduous paperwork tied to legal requirements. Even though a growing number of students were receiving special ed services, only about 10% participated in statewide assessments, resulting in little accountability for students with disabilities. Additional amendments to IDEA in 1997 shifted the focus from providing access to public education services to providing meaningful and measurable programs for all students with disabilities. Significant components of this were the measurable annual goals have to be written, mandatory assessment and measurement of progress, increased parent involvement of the development of their child's IEP, and an invitation to participate throughout the special education process, and mandatory reporting of goal progress to parents. The law said that if a student was not making sufficient progress towards meeting their goals, the plan needed to be revised. In direct response to the growing inclusion movement, IDEA now required the IEP team to specify why a decision was made to pull a student with disabilities from the general education classroom. It also directed that a general education curriculum with supplementary aids and services must be considered before an alternative special education curriculum is instituted. So, special education today includes the No Child Left Behind Act and IDEA 2004 have enhanced the quality of special education programs at the state level. No Child Left Behind addresses accountability for student achievement by requiring increased participation in statewide assessments by students with identified disabilities. The law also calls for highly qualified teachers, including those who teach special education. The intention of NCLB is to tighten the achievement gap for students considered to be at risk. Um, IDEA allows for alternative models to identify learning disabilities, such as response to intervention, providing high quality instruction and interventions matched to student need, monitoring progress frequently to make decisions about changes in instructions or goals, and applying child response data. Oh, excuse me. I'm getting tired. Whew. Oh, I didn't get my nap today. I've gotten to where I really need an afternoon nap. Goodness. Let's see. And am monitoring progress frequently to make decisions about changes in instruction or goals, applying child response data to important educational decisions. So, the response to intervention, RTI, is primarily a general education initiative. It has a significant impact on how the school community views struggling students. Instead of sending them off to special ed, the emphasis now is on preventing learning gaps from occurring and addressing minor academic and behavior issues before they become major. Perhaps the most fundamental message of NCLB and IDEA is that special education should continue to focus on producing results. To do so, educational plans must include research-based programming, and IEP teams must continue to write measurable annual goals, address how progress will be monitored, and make revisions if progress is not made. Overall, the provisions of these two programs focus less on procedural compliance and more on results. So, where do we go from here? During the past 2 decades, the number of students with special needs being educated in the general education classroom has progressively increased. Reports to Congress show that close to 95% of students with disabilities are being educated in local general education schools, and 75% receive either full inclusion or a combination of inclusive and pull-out resource room services. Professional literature increasingly speaks to how teachers can use differentiated instruction to address variance in the general education classroom without the need for specialized instruction from a special education teacher. As the trend continues to move towards inclusion, Some fear the lines between general education and special education are being blurred and that we are losing track of the most basic tenet of special education, individualization. While that concern is most certainly valid, the progress that has been made cannot be ignored. Whereas integration was the prominent theme in decades past, today we are accountable for education that is meaningful, formative, results oriented, and individualized for all students, not just those with diagnosed disabilities. True. When principals consider how to improve special education even further, it may be helpful for them to reflect on the following questions. What can be learned from the history of special education? Are the actions and decisions of general education and special education teachers reflective of the philosophy employed in my building? What underlying factors might be affecting negative views from members of the community, principals, and teachers? And what are teachers doing to differentiate instruction for all learners, and how can I support their efforts? By placing these issues and trends in historical perspective, principals can appreciate how the field of special education has come, how far it's come, and promote further advancement. With the passage of these special education laws more than 30 years ago, parents and educators celebrated the fact that students with disabilities were granted the right to education. Today, we want to ensure that the disabled students not only have access to educational services, but they are all entitled to a meaningful education that facilitates learning at all levels and produces measurable outcomes. So there's lots of references. And this is from the National Association of Elementary School Principals. So, let's see. Here's something about the least restrictive environment. Let's have a look at this. All right. So here's where this a student with a disability is considered in their least restrictive environment when they're learning and integrated with the general education population as much as is possible. So they might be hospital homebound, they might be in a special ed residential program, they might have a separate day school or special ed school. They might be partially removed from regular education, or they might be in a regular education classroom. So, a lot of disabled people will be moved between these as they had episodes of maybe severe illness and all. So, um, IEP teams largely determined what is least restrictive. Preconceived ideas of where students with disabilities must learn, pressure from other team members and administrative factors, lack of resources, not enough staff, scheduling. Sadly, opinions about which classrooms students with disabilities belong in are often formed based on perceived limitations. For example, a staff member assuming that a student with an intellectual disability will never be able to read or participate in a group activity. In many cases, when children aren't progressing in the general ed setting, it isn't because it's impossible for them to do so, but rather because the school has yet to exhaust all avenues to successfully integrate that child. Perhaps the team doesn't even know where to start. School failures to implement successful inclusion rarely come with bad intentions or selfish motives. The truth of the matter is that many school personnel lack the experience, training, and skills to make inclusion work for all students. Many teachers and administrators aren't aware of the scope of what can be done and what can be made available through requests and support from the district. There's a great deal of research that supports that when inclusion is done with the intent of meeting the unique needs of each student with an IEP, it works for most students. Studies have shown that even children with moderate to severe disabilities gain benefit from inclusive environments in comparison to groups of children with disabilities that remained in self-contained settings for the length of their school day. So, we need to try to include our disabled children as much as possible. And have I put this link out? No. Let me put the link out. And this is defining the least restrictive environment. So I will put that there and take this link and put it here. Okay, Jordan, good to see you. So let me go back and bless your heart. So, what was the reason that you quit? Um, were they just totally not fulfilling your needs? What exactly was going on that led you to that decision? If you don't mind talking about it. 'Cause, it seems like they should have done more to make it possible for you to do it. It's alright. So you got a certificate. Don't worry about your spelling. Oh, I'm getting your meaning, and that's what's important. So, so what do you think they did right, and what do you think they did wrong? Because I was frankly very disappointed when my older daughter, um, she had severe, severe ADD, and I thought that if she went to a special ed class, she'd get some tutoring to help her with the subjects she was having problems with. And they were drawing pictures all day. It's like I thought she was gonna get tutoring. So I was extremely upset with it, and I ended up taking her out of the special ed class because it really wasn't helping her in any way. And she still had troubles, and she was a smart kid, but she just had problems getting the work done. I got very frustrated with the amount of homework that she was getting, and kids nowadays get a lot more homework than she did. Caturated? I don't understand. So so you got, um let's see, so certified? Okay. It's alright. Can you put it another way? Sometimes it's easier just to say it in lay terms rather than use the terms they used in the school. I'm not real familiar with Canadian schools either, so I know what US schools are like, sort of. I've, had kids in school in a couple of states, and, I ran into the same problems no matter where the school was in different cities or whatever, um, that, everywhere I went, when I was talking to parents who had kids with disabilities in the classroom, that there were so many problems. Um, and they really felt that the schools weren't doing enough for their children. And, you know, it seems to me that one of the big problems with all schools seems to be bullying and cyberbullying, and um, they don't spend enough time socializing students, teaching them how to do conflict resolution, getting them to talk honestly with each other and not use hurtful words to, to solve their differences. And, I've heard so much from young people saying that, people were picking on them all day at school, and this shouldn't be allowed to happen. In my book, that is abuse. And they need to do something to allow young people to have friends and talk to their friends, but at the same time, they need to prevent students from name calling and punishing people with words when they can be teaching them healthier ways to disagree with each other, ways that don't hurt the self-esteem. So they made y'all wear a different uniform than everybody else was, or did everybody wear the blue uniforms? Okay. So, are you talking about graduation, or are you talking about just every day at school you had to all wear school uniforms? Did you have, a rough time in school as far as how other students treated you? Or were the staff on top of that? Okay, how was your school experience overall? Did you enjoy school, or did you have problems enjoying school because of other students? So, so, the first one of what I said, you were in programs and you got certificates. So, you, and y'all wore uniforms in school. And they've done a lot of that at schools in the United States. They say it equalizes things, it makes it easier for, kids not to be singled out because 'cause they're not wearing the latest Nikes or whatever. Um, but at the same time, the uniforms are expensive, and if you don't have a lot of money to buy them, then it's really hard for low-income parents in the United States to afford the uniforms because the parents have to pay out of pocket for that. And they do have some programs to provide uniforms, but a lot of times those programs run out of money before they get to parents that can afford that. But, but what worried me about what I saw of special education in the schools that my daughters attended was that their needs weren't really being met. There were too many people in the class and not enough of the teacher to go around, and especially with all the paperwork that they've saddled teachers with, that the teachers don't have time to teach. They're too busy filling out paperwork. And I feel like they need to quit testing so much. I know that they want to benchmark, they want to see if students are progressing, but I wonder if it might be better to just observe, you know, the student's ability to tell what they learned rather than giving these standardized tests. 'cause the tests they give are too hard for people to understand if they speak a different language than English at home, or they, have a different way of, relating to each other that they don't understand the examples given in the tests. They've found that these big tests that come from the government aren't really fair to a lot of the students because they don't understand what the question is asking on the test. They can't relate to it in their families. But, I feel like that, when a student has disabilities, they need to be able to participate in regular classes, but they need to not be bullied because maybe they speak differently or think differently or act differently because of their disability. Everybody should be included, and it should be peaceful. They should teach all students to, if you disagree, you can agree to disagree. You can find a common ground about what you're talking about. You can use healthier ways to communicate. You can say, all right, no name calling, no putting somebody down because they dress differently or because they act differently or because they're a different religion than you, um, because their skin's a different color, or because they're in special ed and, you know, they shouldn't be made fun of. They should be able to, communicate in healthy ways. Okay. So in public school, at first you were in a room for the special needs kids, and then in high school you went to different classes and you were with the regular people, and then in college they did life skills. So, did you like your classes? Did you like the special needs classroom better than the regular classes, or did you like the different classes better? Did it work for you? Do you feel like it helped you? Because when I was going to school, I had okay. Well, history has a lot of memorization, and if you've got, um did you have learning disabilities, and did that hold you back, or was it just really difficult to read and understand what you were trying to learn? For normal people, For normal people, you forget about 90% of what you learn in school. I had roughly 4 years of college. I don't have a degree, but I remember very little from my classes, which is disgusting. I worked so hard to learn it. So, I didn't have learning disabilities. I had really not too much trouble memorizing and remembering it for the test. And I tried not to cram because cramming, you're not going to remember any of that after you get done. You're going to spit it out on the test and then you're not going to have anything left. But, you know, when I was in elementary school, we never saw the disabled kids except on the playground. And it was really sad because a lot of people were picking on them, and teachers would say, "Don't do that." So I never knew what it was like for the folks in the special ed classes. Um, then in junior high, they were still in the special ed class, and people were pretty cruel. I didn't like that at all. And in high school, I never saw any of the students from the special ed class. Apparently, they weren't even in high school. But, I've got a good friend whose son he has several learning disabilities. It's very, very difficult for him, and he just graduated from high school last year. Bless your heart. It's gotta be hard. They really need to make more education available for folks like you in a format that's easier. Um, 'Cause, you need to be able to balance your checkbook and, understand instructions and things like that, and there are ways to make that easier. I wish that they had, helped you more, because learning disabilities are just awful. My friend's son is excellent at sports. He's just very, very skilled with sports, but with the school, it's just like pulling teeth for him. And she worries about, once the sports are over, then what's he going to do to support himself? It's a very real fear that a lot of parents have for their kids with these difficulties because it's hard to function in the outside world with them. So, I'm sorry you're having so many difficulties with that, 'cause, yeah, I wonder in your case if, were other kids pretty understanding about your troubles, or were they just like, "Oh, you just don't work hard enough," which is dumb because, you know, my friend's son worked really, really hard to try to just pass everything. And, she felt that he didn't get enough help from the school to get what he needed. And it's gotta be just really hard when you have trouble in understanding instructions and stuff. it's got to be very, very hard. And, difficulties with learning has nothing to do with how smart you are. It has everything to do with how you get the information up there. Once you've got it up there, you can use it. Oh my. Yeah. City buses, they're hard. They're even hard for people with no difficulties at all. Um, a lot of people would, take the wrong bus and stuff. When I first came to Atlanta and had, now I had a little bit of experience with buses before I moved to Atlanta, so we would go to Atlanta sometimes and Mama would take me on the bus, and so I learned a little bit about it. But every once in a while they change how they take the money and how transfers work, and so I had to relearn all of that. I mainly learned how to take buses from taking them just when I didn't need to go a certain place. I just took buses places to see where they went and see the scenery. But I had no learning difficulties all at all, and learning how to take the buses was hard for me. I don't blame you. I always had test anxiety. Every time that I was going to take a test, my shoulders were just like this. I was just like scared to death that I was going to fail, that I wouldn't remember the stuff, and afraid that just my fear of the test would sink me before I even picked up the pencil and tried to fill in the little circles. So I can understand that. There is some research that maybe they don't need to give tests, or they don't need to give them as much as they do, because we're learning all the time. We learn just from having experiences. And so you can learn a lot just watching somebody do something and imitating what they do. You don't necessarily have to be able to read instructions. I mean, it's good that you can, if you can, but if you can't understand the instructions, maybe the pictures are enough, or maybe you can watch somebody go about putting it together. If it's like those furniture things that you get at Walmart you have to put together. Um, we have many ways of learning besides book learning, exams, and all that stuff. There are a lot of different ways to learn. And a lot of people with learning disabilities are very intelligent people. They are good at figuring out problems, solving problems. So the fact that it may be hard for you to learn from a book or the way that schools teach you doesn't mean that you can't learn, and it certainly doesn't mean that you don't know anything. You probably know a whole bunch of things that I don't know. So it's important to teach kids this in school, that learning disabilities are so hard, but they really need to figure out other ways to teach besides the traditional way of reading a lot and taking tests. And they need to design learning programs for people who have these learning disabilities so that they can learn differently, that fits their abilities. Because, goodness. Well, they should have it at all levels, not just college. They should have it in the in the elementary schools and in junior and senior high or middle school. They should have different ways of learning to allow people with learning disabilities who have troubles with the traditional ways of teaching, that they can do something else, that kids can still learn what their strengths are, because everybody has talents. Everybody can do something better than someone else. Yeah, yeah, transportation. Yeah, it's good. How do you feel about cooking after them teaching you to cook? Did did it work, or do you still have trouble cooking? Because really, every time you're following a recipe and cooking, you are doing chemistry. You know, that's why it doesn't always work to substitute an ingredient or put a different amount than the recipe says. It might not taste too good, or it might, if you're cooking a cake, it might fall in the oven instead of fluffing up and being nice to eat. So it you need to know those life skills, certainly, but I hope that they taught in a way that worked for you. A lot of bus systems have a little training on how to ride the bus for everybody, not just disabled people. Because bus systems can be very confusing. Even Atlanta's system is confusing, and it's just got one train system pretty much, a north line to south, and then it's got the east to west to east to west, you know. But there aren't a whole bunch of stations, and there aren't a whole bunch of little spur lines that go off from the main plus sign. But it can be very confusing to read a bus schedule because understanding where the bus goes from the little maps they give are hard. I got pretty good at it with practice, but it took me a while. Yeah. He just wants to make sure that you can survive on your own when he's gone. And you know, it's um it's so important to give yourself a break, because when you're disabled, a lot of things are just really, really harder than you want them to be. It's, you know, but you might I wish I had some good suggestions. I don't really. Um that sounds good. How do you like cooking? Are there things you like to cook more than others? When I was learning to cook, I always liked sweets, so I love to bake cookies and make cakes and puddings and stuff like that, so I was motivated to learn those things. Of course, I did learn the other things, but I never really learned to fry anything because the grease just hurts when it gets on you, it pops. So I never learned to like that. Well, you know, I wouldn't call it laziness if things get overwhelming for you. You have to give yourself permission to let yourself go at your own pace. And it gets tough. I'm very disorganized. I have a lot of problems just finding the things I use every day because I haven't made places for them to stay until I'm ready to use them. So even though I didn't have much trouble learning things, I have a lot of trouble just being organized, and that's the attention deficit disorder. I tend to get very distracted, and a lot of things can imitate ADD, and some learning disabilities can go along with that, or they can imitate it. Because for attention deficit disorder, talking about my disability, there are a list of about 30 symptoms, and the gauge for it is if you have that symptom over half the time, then that's an indicator. And both myself and my daughters had they separate them into visual, auditory, and kinetic. Visual is what you can see, auditory is what you hear, and kinetic is movement. And people who are hyperactive have trouble holding still. They want to be in motion all the time. But both me and my girls, we had the trouble hearing things, hearing directions. I still will miss the couple of words at the beginning of a sentence. And my daughter will usually repeat the end of the sentence, and I'll say, I heard you. I wasn't paying attention when you started the sentence. What did you say at the beginning? So, um, we both have problems with being organized and being able to find things and just basically organizing our day so things get done. Oh, yeah, anxiety. Anxiety is the plague of disability because, even if even if your disability is physical, there's still that anxiety, that fear that you'll be asked to do something that you can't do, or that you won't be able to do something that you're trying to do. Yeah, when I have trouble understanding something, if it's something complicated that I'm reading through and trying to build, I get anxiety when I can't understand what the directions are wanting me to do, so I can definitely relate to that. And, recipes can be very confusing. Mhm. True, true. It is a physical thing as far as your learning ability. And, ADD is physical too. It's, trouble paying attention and trouble getting stuff from short-term memory into long-term memory where it's there and we can remember it. So, I have a lot of problems getting my stuff done. I'm still behind on re-editing my book that's out, and it's got some mistakes in there, and it's really embarrassing. And I've made some progress, I just haven't made it quickly. And, I've got ADD, I have mobility problems, I tend to fall a lot if I'm not holding on to something. So I have to, like, hold on to the wall all the way down the hall and stuff like that. I would be using my walker, but I'm trying to walk around without it to get more exercise, but I did do 11 laps between the bedroom and the living room today. I So that was one more than I did yesterday. But it's really frustrating when my daughter's trying to tell me about something. It's like, wait, 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 wait. What are you talking about? What's the subject here? And she'll be saying, oh, my such and such game. And it's like, it's a game I don't play. And so it's like, oh, you got to tell me this is a game and this is not something in real life, or this is not a YouTube. And, then I can kind of get there. Communication can be hard. It'd be nice if we just had telepathy and we could just think something with pictures to somebody and then they'd know exactly what we were talking about. So, anxiety is hard, but what helps me when I get all, unsettled and trying to do something and get frustrated, I'll just take a few deep breaths and just kind of calm myself down and just think about, all right, here's my problem. Yeah, it's so hard to explain anxiety to people who don't suffer from it. And you can't really tell anxiety to go away. Feelings need to be expressed. You have to get that energy out somewhere. So, just doing something little to get out of the paralysis that comes when the anxiety is so huge can help. It helps me because sometimes my anxiety just takes over. It's like, "Oh, no, what are we gonna do?" And I'll get my daughter in here, and we'll sit down and talk about whatever it is. Usually, it's about finances and stuff. We're beginning to relax a little bit because she's making money now, and our finances aren't quite as tight as they were. But, I, um I bought some 3D models yesterday, and I felt so guilty because for months, we've been just really if we're gonna spend $1, we have to sit down and talk about it. And I spent $30 on 3D models, which I haven't done in over a year, and I was starting to feel like, "Oh, why did I do that? That's a lot of money." But on the other hand, I can use the models that I bought in my book covers, so it's justified from the standpoint of my writing business, and, I haven't even been able to play with it because I've been kind of down about spending so much money, which is ridiculous because, my daughter I talked to her about it, and she says, "Yeah, go ahead, mom." And I was so excited about it, but I haven't played with it yet. I need to just break through this anxiety and just enjoy what I got because it's some really neat things. I've got a couple of good hairstyles and yeah, I know. Same here. I've never had to go to the hospital because of my anxiety, but still, it does affect your life. It really is hard to get it to calm down so you can think rationally because your brain just goes nuts when the anxiety is up, and it's like, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. What? And you start thinking of more things you need to do, and none of it's getting done. And it's like, ah. But what I try to do is just pick one thing to concentrate on. And then I don't worry so much about the other stuff. I'll just do one thing and then I can say, okay, I got that off my to do list. And then I'll pick the next thing. And, sometimes bedtime comes before I get through that thing. But anxiety is paralytic. It makes you not want to do anything. It makes you just wanna sit there and just be scared to move, and so I try to embrace my inner self and say, "Look, just relax. Take a deep breath." You know, you tend to ignore all of the things that you have done that are good. And you tend to pay attention to those things that have not gotten done or that you are not satisfied with how you did them. And it's bad to label things as bad or good. I did a good thing, I did a bad thing. Things are not really so black and white. You know, well, no problem, and I'll talk about it again. Just try to calm down your anxiety and say, "I'm doing the best I can, self. Don't persecute me." Take care, and, I gotta take my meds soon as well, but, take care, and I enjoyed talking to you, Jordan. Glad to see you. And, I think I'm gonna go ahead and end the live stream. We've talked a little bit about God bless you too, Jordan. Take care. Hope you have a good night. And I will just say that, you know, education is hard from the standpoint of teachers and administrators. They're trying to figure out how they can support all of the goals set by the federal government and do the best for their students. And then it's hard for students because a lot of school is very hard for them. And when you have disabilities, school is just harder. It doesn't matter what your disability is. If it's a mobility disability, it's still harder because you're seeing what the normal kids are doing and you're feeling like, "Oh, I can't do that." Um, or maybe you can do some things better than your peers, but not enough to make yourself feel good about how well you're doing. And teachers do the best they can. I'm not anti-teacher. And principals and school administrators and school board members, they all are trying to do the best thing. But I want to see more love in the schools. I want to see more anti-bullying efforts. I really want cyberbullying to end. I want somebody to write an algorithm. I've got this little bot in my chat that tries to identify things like hate speech and bad words and things like that, and it does a pretty good job. I don't see why school administrators could not employ these in the chat in schools so that you catch hate speech. I don't know why social media can't run these to get people not to be picking on each other. It's okay to disagree if you can do so respectfully and with an eye towards trying to, be nice about discussing things. But this blatant hate and racism and discrimination is not good for anybody. So I would encourage anybody that's watching my program, you know, talking about schools and education. I would really like to see school administrators of every school sit down with a local child psychologist and bounce ideas off each other, because the problems with schools are not going to go away, and we are making progress and doing things to improve them. But we really need more partnerships between the psychology community and the education community as far as what's really good for kids. And we need more trust between them to work together for the best for our children and young people. So, you know, so that more kids get an education, and so more young people can learn the things they need to learn to be able to support themselves in this ever changing world. And we'll be talking more about this. But for now, I'm going to end my live stream and thank y'all for being with me. And let's see who's still there. Oh, Academy Impossible, Angelfer, Angelfer, Angifer, another TV viewer, Freaky Yolo NR1, Haas 0312, good to see you again, and Wrecking God. Good to see all of you, and I hope you will come to Granny's house again to talk about disabilities, and hopefully I won't be half falling asleep next time. I gotta get that afternoon nap. Granny needs her afternoon nap. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that all of you were with me, and thank you, Jordan, for talking in the chat. And all of you who didn't comment, I hope that you will feel free to comment if you want to, but I don't mind if you just hang out with me. Thank you for coming to Granny's house, and I hope to see you again. Until tomorrow night, this is Dennis Cole, aka GrannyHandicap, saying good night, and I will see you tomorrow. Y'all take care. Bye. Farewell for now, and see y'all next time.